shaft.
It's another day. Let's get back to it. We pick up right where we left off at the end of the last episode with me taking the engine out of the Mini and stripping the engine bay. So let's cue some tunes and time-lapse our way through this. Well, it's not my day, is it? First of all, I had the battery go, and then my memory card filled up, so I missed the glorious moment of the engine actually coming out. Good news is, though, it turns out with the correct angle on the engine leveler, you can actually get the engine out through the engine bay, which has just made my life a hell of a lot easier. So, with that out and the subframe removed from the car, we've got a couple more items, mainly the fuse panel and relay bracket, and the master cylinders to come out of this engine bay, and then we can move on. Before we put the engine back in, the engine bay does need a bit of attention. Now, my dad has already very kindly stripped back a lot of the surface rust and treated it with an anti-rusting chemical. Despite me doing all the bodywork on this car a couple of years ago, as it's a Mini and unfortunately the fire extinguisher that we had to use on it on the Mongol Valley, some surface rust has formed. Before I go painting it, however, there are a couple of areas I need to address. The first being this. This is what's left of the upper steady bar bracket. Now, if you've got an A-series engine, you'll know all about this. There is a bar that goes to a bracket here to the side of the cylinder head. As we don't have an A-series, we don't need this bracket, so I'm going to remove what's left of it. The next problem is we have a crack in the bodywork here. This has had a patch at some point and hasn't been completely done, so I am going to address that. Finally, there are two other areas that need to be addressed. The first is under here. It's very difficult to see without light, but basically there is a crack running here in the bodywork that was caused by the rough roads on the Mongol Valley. The other side has a corresponding one, so I'm going to have to drill an arrest hole at the top to stop that crack propagating any further and weld it up. The first part of the bodywork repairs was to drill out the spot welds of the upper steady bar bracket. Despite centre punching the spot welds, the spot weld drill did have a tendency to wander a bit. With the spot welds drilled out, it was then just a case of using a hammer and steel chisel to prise the rest of the steady bar bracket off the bulkhead. The last step in removing the bracket was to use a flat wheel on an angle grinder to remove the remaining bit as well. With that done, I can move on to repairing the cracks in the inner wing. There is one of the cracks that's all been cleaned up, ready to be welded, and there's a hole drilled at the top to stop the crack from propagating. Apologies for the terrible camera angles, but working on minis often requires you to work in really cramped spaces. Anyway, with the cracks in the bodywork prepped, it was then just a case of welding them. As normal, when welding bodywork, it's a case of using low amps, taking your time, and doing it in loads of small sections so as not to build up too much heat and distort the panels. With everything that needed welding in the engine bay welded, it was then just a case of preparing it for paint. The first step in painting the engine bay was to thoroughly clean everything, including wiping all the surfaces down with Prepsol. Next was to apply treatment to any surface rust that had formed. Once the rust treatment chemicals had done their job and dried, I could then replace any of the old seam sealant that had cracked and dried out. The next step should have been to mask the car and then apply a primer paint to anywhere that there was bare metal or seam sealant. Except I forgot to film that, so we're just going to skip straight on to me applying the top coat. Fortunately, I still had the sheet with the paint code on it from when I bought paint previously for the Mini, so I could just get a couple of aerosol cans mixed up with matching paint. After the top coat dried, I went around and touched up any of the underseal that needed it. With the engine bay painted, we can now start reassembling the car. However, before we do that, there are still a few parts that need to be cleaned up and sorted when I go back in, namely the master cylinders. The first step in sorting out the master cylinders was to disassemble them. Believe it or not, that master cylinder was brand new when I rebuilt the car for the Mongol Rally. At the time of recording this, it's only a little over 2 years old, and while it does still work, it doesn't exactly look great. Fire extinguishers really mess up your paint. In order to get the reservoir off the master cylinder, I had to drive out a roll pin, which proved troublesome. Ultimately, I had to break the roll pin to get it out. With the clutch master, brake master and compensating valve all clean, they were ready for paint, but before I did that, there was one more part that needed some attention. This is the plate that goes underneath the master cylinders and also is part of the upper steady bar mount. This is from another Mini I own. Yeah, I know it's pretty crusty, it will get cleaned up and painted back at some point. This is the same plate that I took from the red mini that we've been working on. And as you can see, it's not in the best of state and that bracket is missing. It broke off when we hit the mother of all bumps we did while doing the Mongol Rally. This, however, isn't as bad as it sounds because this part will actually interfere with the manifold on the micro engine. The other part of the bracket, which is welded to the Mini's bodywork, I removed earlier. We've already gone and incorporated an upper steady bar mount into the manifold bracket and the rear of the subframe. I'm just going to quickly pause the video here. Due to the time crunch I was under trying to get the car ready for a trip, I was having to jump from job to job. I had already made the new upper steady mount that I just mentioned, however I've not yet shown it to you. It will feature in an upcoming episode. So this can be trimmed and cleaned up, ready to go back on the car. With the plate welded up, it was then just a case of trimming the sides down and lynching the weld back. With everything clean and the plate that sits under the master cylinders modified, it was then just a case of painting them. This started with a rust neutralising chemical before moving on to etch primer and then top coat. The master cylinders were actually painted silver rather than the usual satin black that most parts have been painted in. With everything painted, it was then just a case of cleaning the remaining parts before reassembling the clutch master cylinder. With the clutch master cylinder done, I could then turn my attention to the brake master cylinder. Instead of trying to source a replacement roll pin and then go to the trouble of fitting it, I decided to tap out the hole in the master cylinder to an M6 thread and fit a stainless steel fastener. The final thing to do before the master cylinders could be fitted was to make a replacement gasket that goes between the bulkhead and the plate that I modified earlier. Now normally you just buy a replacement gasket, however I forgot and didn't really have time to get one without delaying the project. That's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please hit that like button and share. If you want to stay up to date with the build, then please subscribe to my channel, and you can also follow my build thread on the mini forum where I sometimes post some behind the scenes stuff and sneak peeks of up and coming episodes. The link is in the description below. Once again, thanks for watching.